Today's episode is brought to you by the D&D horror podcast Dark Dice. Stick around to the end to find out more. And with that, let's get rolling. 2 weeks ago, Disney premiered their new animated Spider-Man streaming series, Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, a fresh new take on the wall-crawling, web-swinging wonder. It's pretty good. It's fresh and exciting and interesting, offering a bold reimagining of the character for a new era, reworking the classic teen soap opera of Stan Lee and Steve Ditko for a modern generation.
When the police get here, could you tell them the webbing should wear off in an hour or so? Don't forget to not like and subscribe.
One of the more interesting aspects of the show is the extent to which it exists in conversation with a modern audience's relationship to Spider-Man. There is, for example, a lot of the recent PlayStation games and the physics, the traversal mechanics, the voice notes, and even the graphic overlays. Hell, some of Spider-Man's big climactic battles even take on the logic of video game boss battles.
Speed boost. Nothing can go that fast without some kind of signal when it goes into overdrive. Try listening out for that.
Right.
However, the show is also very firmly in conversation with the most recent mainstream adaptation of the character, the version played by Tom Holland in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man is constantly riffing on and alluding to those movies. Indeed, if the show has a weakness, it's that it is occasionally too heavy-handed in its references and allusions.
I could be your guy in the chair. Ned, I don't need a guy in the chair.
He can be your...
Dude at the desk!
Not how I would have put it.
For example, it honestly really bugs me that Spider-Man's red and blue costume is apparently an homage to Captain America, as opposed to something that just looks good.
I would like a lot more red and blue, like Captain America.
That said, the show isn't just pointing and referencing, it exists in conversation with those movies. Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man is a show about what makes Spider-Man Spider-Man, and in some ways feels like a criticism of the limitations of Marvel's earlier approach to the character. So, we're going to talk this week about the first half of Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, the MCU's approach to the character, and what it means to be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. There will be minor spoilers, but nothing too serious. With that in mind, let's get into the swing of things.
Let's see how funny you are with a concussion!
The first episode of Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man is bookended by references to the MCU. It opens by tying Doctor Strange into Spider-Man's origin, which, while you could generously interpret it as a reference to Steve Ditko's key role in creating both characters, really feels like an allusion to the character's existing relationship in Spider-Man No Way Home. At the end of the episode, Peter returns to his apartment to find a sports car parked outside. Aunt May is upstairs having a conversation with a billionaire who's taken an interest in Peter. This is an obvious reference to the introduction of Peter Parker in Captain America Civil War. In Civil War, the billionaire is Tony Stark, the founding father of the MCU. In the show, it is Norman Osborn, who even the most casual comic book movie fan will know is kind of a bad guy. He was the original Green Goblin and Spider-Man's long-term arch-nemesis. Hell, they even recently brought back the Green Goblin for Spider-Man No Way Home. In both stories, Peter falls under the influence of this billionaire savior, who invests large sums of money reinventing Spider-Man in his own image in support of the Sokovia Awards, which is the MCU's equivalent to the Superhero Registration Act from the comics. The result of this choice is to immediately elevate Peter, an urban vigilante, to the heights of superheroism, where, over the course of the MCU, Peter is crashing planes out of the sky, fighting elemental monsters, and saving the fabric of reality itself.
You can't be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man if there's no neighborhood.
To understand why these adaptations took this particular approach to the character of Spider-Man, we're gonna have to dive into the comics for a little bit. Historically, Spider-Man was something of a loner. The very first issue of his own book has him trying to join the Fantastic Four, and failing. For decades, Spider-Man was not a joiner, allowing for the occasional story where he might cross paths with the Avengers. Spider-Man operated in his own small corner of the universe, dealing with his own threats. Just for context here, it's probably worth pausing to acknowledge that the Avengers were not always Marvel's biggest brand. While the team launched with the publisher's biggest heroes, the book quickly became a clearinghouse for characters left homeless by cancellation and direction shifts. They were not the center of the shared universe. They were vastly overshadowed by the commercial success of both the X-Men and Spider-Man titles. That's why, by the way, at the turn of the millennium, studios like Fox and Sony snatched up the rights to make movies about the X-Men and Spider-Man. Hell, Sony were offered the chance to buy almost Marvel's entire roster for $25 million, and they turned it down. Because according to their executives, nobody cared about the characters who weren't Spider-Man. And when studios are snatching up the right to Ghost Rider but not Thor, let's just say that doesn't bode particularly well for Thor's place in the public consciousness.
I'm very protective of the humans because they're so helpless and ridiculous.
So naturally, when Marvel decided to start making their own movies, the Avengers and characters like Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor were seen as leftover misfit toys that they had to make work. Around 2005-ish, the publisher began reimagining its properties, launching high-profile Avengers-centric titles like the Alternate Universe Take, Mark Millar and Brian Hitch's The Ultimates, and Brian Michael Bendis' in-continuity New Avengers. At the same time, they began marginalizing their X-Men characters, with veteran writers like Chris Claremont acknowledging that the publisher saw no real value in promoting teams that had movie rights at rival studios. There's always been some speculation that this realignment was intended to serve as research and development for the film division. While developing New Avengers, Bendis reconfigured the team as Marvel's biggest characters, adding Wolverine and Spider-Man to the permanent roster. This decision was so radical that, reflecting on leaving the books, Bendis recalled protests that, quote, "Spider-Man would never be an Avenger." Reportedly, it came from a mustached publisher at the end of the table. I don't know what to tell you. But it worked. The book was a massive success, and it served as one of the templates for the modern cinematic universe. While people tend to focus on the heavy influence of the Ultimates on the aesthetic of the early MCU, Bendis' New Avengers run is just as pivotal. However, this decision to have Spider-Man join the team after 4 decades as a solo hero involved a major reconfiguration of the character's superhero persona. In J. Michael Straczynski's concurrent Amazing Spider-Man run, Peter even moved into Avengers Tower and became Tony Stark's mentee. One could see the very obvious influence of this run on the MCU, right down to individual action sequences which seem to have been storyboarded in that run. One of the big moments in this era of Spider-Man comes in the event comic Civil War, written by Mark Millar and illustrated by Steve McNiven. Again, a major touchstone for the MCU. Tony Stark convinces Peter Parker to join him in supporting the Superhero Registration Act. This obviously became the basis of Peter's introduction to the MCU. However, it's important to stress that this narrow window of comics continuity was an aberration in the character's long history, existing in sharp contrast to Spider-Man's traditional portrayal as a working-class street-level hero.
So you want to look out for the little guy, you want to do your part, make the world a better place, all that, right?
Yeah, just looking out for the little guy.
Hell, the comics themselves realized this. By the end of the comic book event Civil War, Peter had come to his senses, his spider senses, if you will, and turned his back on Tony Stark and the privileges and the power that came from being the mentee of, well, you know. There was a general sense that this chain of decisions had messed up the character so badly that Peter ended up selling his marriage to the devil to reset himself as a street-level vigilante, but look, we really don't have time to get into that right now. However, the MCU fixated on this strange chapter of Spider-Man's history and made it the character's defining characteristic in this adaptation. It reconfigured iconic Spider-Man villains like the Vulture and Mysterio as Iron Man villains, fighting Spider-Man as a proxy for their own hatred of Tony Stark. It had Tony leave Peter a fleet of killer drones and a pretty killer set of sunglasses too, and gave him access to a private jet and a manservant. It pushed Peter away from the working-class origins that had been so integral to the character for decades, treating Iron Man's patronage of Spider-Man as an uncritical ideal. This is what makes Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man so interesting. It is very clearly riffing on this relationship between Tony Stark and Peter Parker, but substituting Tony Stark with Norman Osborn, a more obviously villainous character. Indeed, this move itself is arguably taken directly from the comics. Following Civil War, there was an era known as Dark Reign, which saw Tony Stark replaced by Norman Osborn as the head of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the top cop of the Marvel Universe. This was a way of fairly explicitly illustrating that Tony had made bad choices because, well, his successor was a more obviously bad man. Indeed, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man consciously and repeatedly alludes to the events of Civil War.
I've never been a Tony Stark fan.
Right.
But I can't say Captain America is totally in the right either.
There is a sense that this is an alternate version of the events depicted in that movie, the movie that introduced Spider-Man into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, with Norman operating in a similar space to Tony, working with the establishment to effectively tame and militarize superheroes as corporate and national assets for General Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross. By the way, Captain America Brave New Worlds in cinemas this weekend, not yet screened for critics. While the MCU treated Tony's relationship to Peter as wholesome and well-meaning, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man makes it clear that Norman is exploiting Peter. In Spider-Man Homecoming, Tony makes some passing references to the idea that he should serve the community and learn to operate at a local level.
Can't you just be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man?
However, the film itself makes it clear that Peter deserves to be operating at the same level as the Avengers, superheroing in Washington, and stopping a raid on Avengers Tower. In contrast, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man makes a point to emphasize the importance of Spidey's street-level heroism, whether saving pets in a burning store, or apprehending a pizzeria thief while emphasizing the importance of forgiveness.
She was just down on her luck. I don't know, maybe let her go just this once?
Indeed, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man makes a point to parallel Peter with his classmate Lonnie Lincoln, where Lonnie's induction into a local street gang led by Big Donovan is very consciously paralleled and even cross-cut with Peter's teaming up with Norman. It's the same basic narrative, just played out at a different level across the show, with a young man falling under the influence of a cynical older mentor hoping to exploit his gifts.
So, you're Spider-Man.
Central to Peter's journey across the first season of Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man is the idea that he needs to be his own man, that he cannot exist as the tool of a billionaire. Spider-Man isn't Captain America. He isn't Iron Man. Hell, he even says,
You know I'm not Thor, right? Because looking at this, all I'm hearing is, you are not worthy.
Over the course of the show, Peter's big arc is learning that he needs to regain his own identity, a theme rendered literal through Norman's attempts to rebrand Spider-Man in his own image, which, not to put too fine a point on it, but, you know. It's a show that seems in conversation with the MCU's previous handling of Spidey, illustrating that Spider-Man shouldn't serve as a stand-in for a billionaire corporate superhero. Spider-Man is a different sort of hero, and that's part of his appeal. There's a sense that your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man understands that this is what makes Spidey, well...
You're amazing.
I've been Darren Mooney, and this was The Backdrop.
This video is brought to you by Dark Dice, the award-winning live play horror D&D podcast produced by the folks at Fool and Scholar Productions. Take the improvisational storytelling you love from Adventurers Nigh and blanket it with a dark and foreboding atmosphere featuring award-winning sound design and music from legendary composers. And then layer in a mix of first-time players, including the likes of Brundlefly himself, Jeff Goldblum. And what you have is Dark Dice. Do you seek humor? The short 30 to 45 minute episodes keep the tension high and the thrills coming. Each season is a new self-contained story, such as Domain of the Nameless God, which follows a handful of adventurers trying to track down a town's missing children, all while having to deal with a doppelganger that's infiltrated the group, slowly taking them out one by one. So what are you waiting for? Dim the lights, turn up the volume, and begin your Dark Dice adventures today. Available for free on YouTube or your podcast service of choice.